that is that complexity quickly arose, and complexity had information, and information is important because as for us as believers, information is necessary for us as living things. That defines us. Another issue you may have that comes up when it comes to the issue of God is this. Well, okay then, if you can argue a case for God, and I'm not going to give a case for it right now, if you can do that, then what about this God himself? Okay, if I concede maybe this God created everything, then what about that God? Did something create that God? This is a question people ask us. Well, who created God? And of course the Prophet Muhammad responded to that. He said, yet see a shaitan will come. Ahadukum, to one of you, he'll say, the shaitan will say to you, Man khalaqa kada wa man khalaqa kada, hatta yaqula man khalaqa rabbak. He'll say, who created this and who created that, until shaitan will say, and who created your Lord? وَإِذَا بَلَغَهُ, if he reaches you, if that comes to you, وَيَسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ وَيَنْتَهِي. And the Prophet said, when that happens, then you seek refuge in God and you cease that. And why do prophets restrict us from that kind of a question? Because that question is the non-question. It's not a valid question. When you understood the nature of God, you can't ask the question, what created God? That's a question you ask towards the universe, but not that which is transcendent by definition. It's no more valid than a Muslim asking, where is God at? If you understand that God is transcendent, he has no physicality to him, therefore he can't have a location, that's a no-go question. It's irrational to ask about God, where is he? You can talk about God's witness, yes, because that's in the Quran, but where is he? Like, where is he in relationship to Naim at this current moment physically? It's the wrong question. Because by his nature, Quranically, it's the wrong question. So some questions, well, they're just not in the realm of our universe that they have any answer to, because they don't fit in the scheme of things, so to say. And that's almost like me asking the atheist who believes in multiple universes, well, where are those other universes at? He doesn't know, because he can never discuss it, except on a theory. But it's something like that, I think. Okay, well, then I've been asked, and I didn't really cover all the things I wanted to, and I'm sorry, this is actually the first time I've ever had to speak in public about trying to argue a case for God, so I'm going to do a little revision on my ability to do this or not. What I want you all to think about is this. We need to explain why the universe is the way it is, intelligent and very structured. We observe as human beings that when we see complex things that, for example, I'll give you an example, another example. If you're an archaeologist, recently in New Mexico, in South New Mexico, another Mayan city has been found. And the Mayans used a lot of that dolomite, this sort of like type of limestone to make their buildings, and dolomite is it erodes very easily. So you see these temple structures, and you see glyphs in them. So as a human being, we observe things. I'll give you maybe an easier example. You're on an archaeological dig, and you're out there digging out there at a site, and you are looking at pieces. You're looking at the dirt, and then you pick up a piece of what looks like pottery, a shard of pottery. How do you know it's not just a naturally formed piece of a conglomeration of the local soil into a clay that hardened a certain way? What would you look for to make you understand that this actually is a shard of pottery and not just a piece of hard clay? You would look for certain things there from your experience of craftsmanship and artifice in that to distinguish it from being just a piece of clay as opposed to an actual shard of pottery. You would look for signs of craftsmanship. Now, proving God as a great designer can be a complicated course to go, but it is a reasonable course to go in many ways, within parameters. You have to explain structure and order in this universe. You have to explain why there are laws and regulations that underline the functioning of things in the universe, that are regular and demonstrable. And from our personal experience as human beings, when we see these things, we say there's intelligence behind them. So, and we see that on common things. There's not one of you here who I would say, if I take off this Starbucks coaster protector, I don't believe there's one of you here who actually believes that if you were that you can go out there in the world today, on any planet in this solar system, or any planet that's been currently found, of the few thousand that have been maybe found so far, out there in our galaxy, you'll actually find another one of these out there in the universe. Because you understand the probability of something of carbon base with this type of green pigment just randomly coming together to form that is extremely improbable. And yet all of you know by looking at that if you were to find that, had you never heard of a thing called Starbucks, if I took this to a tribe of people in New Guinea who never saw Starbucks, and I asked them what that was, they could look at that and say someone must have made that from their own experience, though they've never heard of Starbucks. Why is that? Because their intelligence as individuals, even if they live in a hunter-gatherer society, could tell you that was crafted by something. Something. You know that movie, The Gods Must Be Crazy? Remember that one?
Yes.
Remember that comedy? What was it? A Coke bottle comes down. Why does he think the gods sent it? Why did he think it was just a natural phenomena? He picks up the Coke bottle. It's like, I've never seen that before. Just looking at it, it tells him there's something about it that it's just not something falling from the sky. It's like Sayyidina Omar. When Sayyidina Omar went to beat his sister up when he found out that she became a Muslim, and he ends up striking her down, right? When he read from Surah Al-Taha, he didn't sit there and say, I'm impressed by the usage of the verb here, the verb khalaqa. I'm impressed by the preposition fa here, or the particle fa. I'm impressed on the usage of that verb here. Truly, Muhammad must be a great grammarian. Sayyidina Omar didn't look at the Taha that way. He looked at it as a reader reads something intelligible. And by looking at it from its collective experience, as one of the Meccans who can read and write, who understands Arabic, that this is not so easy to explain intelligibly. His whole collective experience of reading the text of the Surah Al-Taha, the beginning of it, the whole experience of seeing it, experiencing it, reciting it, convinced him on that moment, as a human being processes it, all that information, that he couldn't just explain it away as mere poetry. And so he was confronted with it at that moment. I think that snippet of the history of Islam is a way we should also be trying to understand the complexity of things around us. Sayyidina Omar understood that the man he knew of Muhammad, that man Muhammad, who he had known for years, who he was fighting against, even with all Muhammad's merits, a truthful man, an honest man, a man of conviction, a man I can oppose, and he still has his convictions, he still couldn't easily explain away that this man could compose this bit of words in front of me that he has in his hands and he's reading, that his sister gave him. And so he's confronted at that moment with the whole collective experience. That is how human beings can understand an issue of the nature of God. Because God has given us that complexity around us to try to challenge. The problem is we try to break it down in minuscule parts that we forget to see the larger holistic picture. And a final thing to think about is yourself. Why are you saying I? What makes you? If I see you sisters sitting here, when I look at your physiology, when I, for example, maybe your blood type is her blood type. You guys can exchange blood. Maybe your liver is compatible physiologically with her liver, so your body will not reject it physiologically. You will not reject it. You're that close compatible. You're so close physiologically. Let's say you were twins, 2 twin sisters. You came from the same exact identical set of chromosomes. The first egg, instead of dividing and creating 2 cells, it completely divides. You end up with 2 individual cells, the first division, and then they continue to divide, and you get 2 genetically identical individuals. So on a physiological basis, on a chemical basis, they're basically exactly the same genetically. Due to their physical circumstances, they may slightly be different. Maybe you like pizza, and so you incorporate pizza into your diet, and she doesn't like pizza, so you don't incorporate pizza into your diet. So you have some distinctions when it comes to what you incorporate into your diet when it comes to food sources. But basically, physiologically, on many levels, you're exactly the same. So if she needs an eyeball, you can exchange your eyeball because it's the same eyeball, basically, genetically. No problem. But what makes you distinct from her? That's an interesting thing to address. Why is your I-ness, your self-awareness of being, I am Roxanne, and I am Aisha, and we are twins. What makes our human individuality to say I, and to be known as an individual, yet we are physically almost exactly the same, to be so distinct? That is an interesting question. And that's exactly how the Quran addresses us as human beings. God addresses himself as I. God wants us to be thinking about individuality. Individuality should be an indicator of divinity, that something is there. These are things that we should be thinking about. Perhaps in the future, if I come back, if I don't get kicked out, maybe we need to go through some of my topical points here and walk you through them. Now, I was also asked about evolution. The issue of evolution. Should Muslims, what do we think about as Muslims? What should we think? Yeah. But so I didn't want to touch that. So I know there are some questions. So I'm going to just stop. And hope you guys are processing some of the things I said. But now let's do this. If you have any specific questions on what things I've covered that need to be clarified, ask me. Or if you want to say, well, what are you really talking about, Naeem? I think I tried to sum it up there at the end. I think the evidences for God are multi-phase. We need to look at it from many perspectives. And they can lead to a collective argument without us having to address sacred scripture to be the proof. The Quran was never revealed to prove God. That was an assumption in the Quran. So get that understood. So if you try to use the Quran as a science book, well, the Quran proves the expansion of the universe. Well, the Quran proves this. Well, it only proves the expansion of the universe if the expansion of the universe is a demonstrable, provable thing. Then maybe you can use it as a proof. But if a better theory comes along 50 years from now, that it's not the expansion theory isn't sound, and you've been proving it, using it to prove the Quran, then you basically disprove the Quran. So it's very, very, very careful about trying to use science and miraculous scientific facts in the Quran as a proof of divine authorship of the Quran. Because that can change in as much as our understanding of science changes based upon our observation. So, go ahead. Any questions?
What should?
My hands are always slipping. You can write them down, you can pass around Mr. Microphone, that's fine.
My question is, does your belief in Islam ever conflict with your scientific education or studies that you have regarding science?
No. How about yours?
A few times.
A few times.
A few times in school, but I always know what to believe and what not to believe, and I learned things that always counter the things I learned in school, because sometimes the things in school are like you said, from people who are materialists, people who see life in one way.
Very reduced approach.
Yeah. And my second question is, actually no, never mind. It's like repetitive to the first one. But we want to open the floor to any questions that anyone has. We passed around the note cards. Oh yeah, okay. Okay, so
My question is, why is believing in God so important?
What do you think that is?
A certain faith that we need to believe,
Well, why?
lean on.
So that's a very personal question, right? For me, like why? Well, first of all, okay, thank you for your question. Oh, you have another question? What's your second question? I'll write it down. All right. So you're basically asking why is it necessary or good to have a belief?
How do you believe that God is real when children are being raped and men are dying in war?
Okay. I got it. Okay, so Bismillah. After the first one, I think that an approach towards believing in a deity, in a God, makes much more sense than the things I've been able to pass. I mean, when I was at Purdue University in my entomology in my senior year, I was taking graduate level biochemistry, and I'd sit there and we had this is like 1987, right? So in 1987, one of the most detailed molecules of the time that had been really discussed and understood of its mechanics was hemoglobin, how hemoglobin functions as a complex molecule that that has an iron atom in it, and it's able to for oxygen to transport. So a lot of years have been spent on trying to understand